Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of JavaScript interview question series. In this video, we're going to discuss about currying in JavaScript. This currying concept is not only for JavaScript, it's a functional programming concept. So interviewer may ask you what is currying in JavaScript, or they can provide you some kind of problems. So the alternate problem can be something like this. Interviewer may ask you to write some function like sum, and instead of passing the parameters like 3, 4, 5 like this is a general sum function, right? So instead of passing the params like this, interviewer may ask you to write some function that can accept the parameter in chain. For example, like this sum 3, and then you call the function again with parameter 4, then again maybe 5, and it should return the sum of all three numbers, 12. Now this concept is called currying. That is, instead of calling the function with multiple parameters, you're calling the function multiple times with chains, and finally it should return the value. That concept is called currying. Now interviewer will ask you to write this sum function. How will you write that? So this problem is easy when you have fixed number of parameters. Like in this case, we have 3 parameters only. So I'll call it fixed length params. This problem is very easy. So first we'll start with the fixed length parameters. We're solving this kind of problem. So we're going to call the function sum in this way. First we can call with 4, then we're calling again with 5. So the output should be 11 plus 4, that is 15. So let's see how we can write this kind of function. So I'll start with creating a function sum. Now take a closer look. If I call sum, first of all it accepts one param. So we can add one param, that is we can call param 1. Okay, now what it is returning? This sum function that is returning another function, correct? Because we're calling the second function here. So that means this sum function is returning another function. So let's return it. Return another function. Now that function is again accepting another param. We can call it param 2, and that function is again returning another function. So return function param 3, and after that you can simply return param 1 plus param 2. Now if I execute it, so whatever the value is, let's have the value in result, and then console.log result. Okay, now I'm executing this function main.js. You can see the result is 15. So it is quite easy to write a currying function if you have the fixed number of parameters. But what if you don't know the number of parameters? So then it becomes an advanced problem. Suppose the problem is something like, you can call this sum, first I'm passing 3, then 4, then 5, then maybe 6, then maybe 7. You can chain it as many number of times you want. And finally, when you pass nothing, or you just call this sum function without any parameters, then you should return the value. Now this problem is little advanced. Now let's think about it. If we have the fixed number of parameters, then fine, you just nest different functions. How will you recursively return functions every time until you call with no parameters? Okay, before solving this problem, let me give another problem that is little intermediate between this easy one and the advanced one. That is not really currying. Let's say the problem is like this. You can have an object like calculator, then you can call some functions in that calculator like .add 3, then .add maybe 4. You can continue this chain, then finally when you call .value, then you return it. So this is not really currying, you can call it chaining. If you're familiar with jQuery, you can see this kind of code, because in jQuery it supports chaining. So this is not a problem of currying, this is chaining. But now the reason I added this is because if you solve this problem, this chaining problems, then the third problem will become easy. So let's try to solve this. So we're going to write one object calculator. This is one object, and I'll call it like this: calculator dot add 3 dot add 4. I can add more chains. After that I'll add value. As soon as I call value, it should return the result. So that means this calculator will have two functions, two methods. One is add, that is a function. Another one is value, that is also a function. Now think about it. How will you add? How will you keep on adding multiple values? Now when you're trying to solve this kind of complex JavaScript problems, always think about what the function is returning. See, this add function is always returning an object so that you can call add again, right? So what this add function will return, this calculator object already has this add and value, so it can return just the current function. So that means this add can return, correct? Now what does that function will do? What is the params of this add function? You can add some numbers, right? So in this add function we can add one param like num. Now whenever you call this method add, it will keep on adding the values, but we will need some storage mechanism, right? So whenever we are calling the function num, it should store the value, it should add the value with something, that is the previous value or previous sum. How will you store it? We already have one object, that is the calculator object. We can store there only, right? So we can add something like this. We can add some private property value. Initially it will be 0, and we can use this private property to store our sum. So whenever you are adding something, you add this private value. So this dot value equals to this dot value plus, all right? And what will happen when you call value? Just return this dot value. Now see what is happening. Whenever I'm calling the function, it is adding the num with the stored value, correct? And when we are finally calling value, it is just returning the stored value. Now let's execute this. You can see the result is 7. It is 3 plus 4. So this function is working. Now why did I tell you to solve this problem? Because you can see that this problem is quite similar to the third one, the third problem, that is the actual coding problem. The only difference is that we don't have any object in the last one. The difference is that we don't have any object in the third question. Both of these problems are similar. You can add multiple values multiple times, then finally when you call value, you should return it. So in the third question, finally when you are calling the function without any params, you should return it. Now let's try to solve the third problem. Similar to the second problem, we need some place to store the value, correct? But function is not providing any storage like object. Let's comment out the old fixed param problem, and then I'm going to comment out this as well. I'll write our function sum for our third problem. So we're going to call like this, let result equals to sum. You can call it multiple times, 3, then 4, maybe 5, then 6. So what will the output? 6, 5, 11, 15, then 18. And finally when we call it without any params, it should return 18. As I told you, to solve this kind of problems, first you think of what the function should return and what are the params. So in this case, we have just one param, that is number. So we can just add one param num, and should return some function. It can return itself like sum, because we can call it multiple times. So definitely it should return sum. Is it going to work? No, because it'll go to recursive loop, right? It will not return anything. It's not adding anything. Now think about it. How you are going to store the intermediate values, like when you are calling 3 and 4, then 3 plus 4 is 7. How will you store that 7 so that when you call the function again with 5, you add 5 with 7? How will you store the intermediate values? So this problem can be solved in many ways, but one of the easy ways using context. If you're not familiar with context, you can watch my other videos. I have explained context in many videos, and also context binding or the bind function. I'm assuming you are familiar with bind function. Otherwise you can watch my old videos. I will add the link here somewhere. You can go and watch the context and bind related videos, and then you can come back. So I'm assuming that you know what is and binding. Now context is one place where you store this intermediate value. So suppose we have some storage object. Let's call it something like storage. This is one object. In this object we can have some property like underscore value, and here we can store the intermediate value. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bind this sum function or current function, so sum.bind, with this newly created object. So this storage becomes the context of this newly created function that we are going to return. So that means when we're calling this sum3, and then whatever the sum3 is returning, that is actually a bound function, and that has one context with the old values. So what is going to be the value here? It is going to be plus the old value, is this dot. So what is this dot value? So suppose we're here, right? Now we are adding this 5. This 5 is the num, and then we're adding with the old context value. So whenever calling this function will have some context, right? And that context will have the value property underscore value. So we're adding this value with the current value. But there is one exception. When you're calling the sum function for the first time, then we're not passing any context. We're not adding any context. So for the first time, this dot underscore value will be undefined. So we can just check that here. If this dot value is undefined, then you just use 0 here. So 0 plus num, so it will be right. And also finally, when you're calling with no params, that is when num is undefined, then what you will do, you just return the stored value, that is this underscore value, correct? Now if you reduce the number of lines, you move this here, creating another variable. So I can directly use this object here, underscore value is num plus core value. All right, now if I execute this, is the problem here? Oh, we have to use this dot bind. Okay, now if I execute this, the problem here, yeah, I have to return here. Let me explain once again what we're doing here. So this sum function that is accepting one number param, so we added this num here, and should return one function that can be called multiple times. And finally, when we are calling it no params, that's num equals to undefined, then we are returning the stored value. Now how the stored value is happening here, every time we are returning the function, we are creating a new context and passing it to the next function. So here basically we are creating a new function. Instead of creating this sum function, we are creating a new function where the context is this. So this context is nothing, this is just an object that has one underscore value property, and in this underscore value property we are just adding current number with the previously stored number. And you can pause the video and take a screenshot, and then you try to solve it without looking at the code. All right, I hope you understood what currying is. This is a little advanced video, so if you're finding it hard to understand, then you can skip this part. You can only learn about the fixed length param currying, and if interviewer asks you about currying, you can just give this example, the first example, and that will be enough just for currying. But if the interviewer asks you like this kind of problem, like variable number of params, then you have to solve that. All right, I hope you liked the video. If you liked it, please hit like, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please subscribe. It will definitely help me a lot. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.